My favorite story about early music Seattle happened when I was on the board of the organization between 2006 and 2009. And my husband and I were vacationing in California in Mendocino, and we happened to stumble on a rehearsal going on there for the Mendocino Music Festival. And I recognized in the flute section of the orchestra, Mindy Rosenberg with her great big hair. She's a flutist and early musician, a member of the Baltimore Consort. And after we left the rehearsal and we're walking along the road, along the bluff in Mendocino, and there I saw Mindy Rosenberg in her car with the, again, recognized her with the big hair. And I knocked on the window and introduced myself as a member of the Seattle Early Music Organization. And right away, Mindy said, "Oh, could you help the Baltimore Consort organize an outreach concert when we're in Seattle in October?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'll try." And I got back to Seattle and started making inquiries. And we were able to set up a outreach concert at both Harborview Hospital in the cafeteria, and then the group roved from room to room, playing for patients. And then also Mindy's sister-in-law, who's a physician, arranged a concert at the hospice of Bailey Boucher in the Madrona Madison Valley, it's called. And this was, I believe it was on a weekend. I went with the group to Harborview, and then we went, after that performance, we went to Bailey Boucher, and I was able to arrange for a photographer from the Seattle Times to show up and take this amazing photo of a patient with the Baltimore Consort in the room. And they were playing for her, and the joy and the emotion that came from her. I wasn't able to be in the room, but I could tell something intense was happening. And afterwards, the members of the Baltimore Consort were, incredibly moved. And they said to me what this patient had said when they gave her a violin and invited her to join them somehow. She said, "If I had legs that worked, I'd get up and dance." And it was just, afterwards we left. We played also in their day room with patients who were ambulatory. And then we went across the street and had lunch. And I have to tell you how moved everyone was. And I have this sense from working on the board and being part of Early Music Seattle for a while, the early musicians being part of small groups are just so expansive and warm-hearted, open-hearted citizens of the world. One of my favorite things about being part of the organization has been meeting these musicians, piling the Italian group that came to do the Monteverdi opera. I can't remember what year it was, but they performed at the Moore Theater, and I picked them up in my old minivan and squeezed 3 or 4 musicians and all the sack butts and bagpipes or whatever they had into the back of my van without being able to open the trunk, unfortunately. And they were very just calm and, took it all in stride, and just wonderful people from all over the world. And also the group Lucidarium, I was just fortunate to become close to some of the members of that group, and just has been a wonderful experience. And I think that this is one way we can heal the world, by having closer relationships with worldwide music groups and performing art groups. I'd love to continue to work with Early Music Seattle and support it for the rest of my life.
Every year around Christmas time, I have had several opportunities to hear the Messiah at different venues. However, I don't particularly like venturing out to attend a concert where there's probably inclement weather, hundreds of people, hassles in parking, and so forth. But in 2020, when I heard that EMS was performing the Messiah through streaming, I decided to try it. Upon hearing EMS perform this beautiful work for the very first time, I suddenly realized how much I enjoyed listening to a small group of musicians just playing their hearts out. The Messiah that was performed by EMS was more emotionally satisfying than any I have ever heard. Truly, it was like being introduced to a new piece of music performed as the composer intended. EMS's performance was so beautiful that it touched me to the very core.
One of the most wonderful things about Early Music Seattle has always been its educational arm, because it's not only the international groups that we have come, it's the education here in Seattle in schools. And I was heavily involved in the schools back when I was really active on the board. And one of my favorite memories is once we were doing the medieval experience in a school. And the way that worked is we would be in a school for 2 weeks, and each classroom would declare itself a domain and choose a symbol, and by putting names in a hat would choose a lord and a lady. And then there would be a grand convocation in which all the domains came with their herald and their little costumes, and that all the lords and ladies would have separate drawing places, and the lords would be drawn. So a name would be drawn from the lords, and that would be the king, and from the ladies, that would be the queen. And the story that really keeps coming back to me is we were having such a drawing. The lords and ladies had been selected. We were all gathered. We were all in medieval costume, and the lords was the first one to be drawn, and whoever drew it read a name out. And it was a little boy who happened to be close to me. And he stood right up with his shoulders back. And he said to me, "I knew I was going to be king." And he adopted this lordly posture and went up to the throne and sat there. He really, this whole educational experience had really touched him and really woke him up to the idea of the way it once was in the kings and queens. And then later we had another gathering in which we taught Renaissance dance. And part of that is doing a bow to the presence. And the presence, I explained to the children, would be where the king or someone would be sitting. And this little boy immediately, I didn't realize he was there, got up, strode to the chair that we had draped, sat there, and said to me, "You may commence." It just struck me as the most wonderful thing, because that was the whole idea of the education, was to get the kids to look in the past and identify somehow with some of it, and really come up with this from the heart response to it. It was really quite wonderful.